Good afternoon, everyone. This is quite an assemblage of people who might be interested in highways in Arkansas. And so thank you for joining us today. I wanted to recognize members of the General Assembly that are here who've been a very important part of this effort. I wanted to thank the members of the Highway Working Group that has devoted a significant amount of their time and energy to making recommendations for new highway funding in Arkansas. And then also certainly see the highway commissioners that have joined us for this occasion, both current and past, which is an important issue for them and their efforts to continue to make highway development a key part of economic growth in the state of Arkansas. I also wanted to recognize Chairman Duncan Baird for his leadership as chairman of the Highway Working Group and all those that really shared the passion and interest and dedication to that task. Where we are in Arkansas right now is there's probably a greater urgent need for immediate infusion of state funds into highway development than ever before, because the federal government passed the federal highway bill that put on the table at least $200 million a year for new funding in Arkansas roads, but it requires a match that the state make. As Scott Bennett, the director of the Highway Department, indicated, if state highway funds are not available at 20% of the total cost, this will equate to an average forfeiture of $200 million per year in federal highway funds, for a total of $250 million of highway projects that cannot be implemented annually in Arkansas. And so it is obvious that of the urgency of the mission that we have and the immediacy of action that is required. If you look at the specific needs short term, and I said, tell me exactly what we have to have this year. And this requires a match of $46.1 million by September 30th of this year, and then an average in the future of about $50 million per year. That is the need that we have found that has been identified. And yes, you could say, well, that's just the starting point. That is the immediate needs, but you also have an overlay program. You've got continued maintenance. You've got new roads that need to be constructed. I agree with all of that. But my responsibility as governor is to make sure that we handle continued highway investment with the other needs of our budget and with what we can do now. And so with that, I wanted to go over the main points of the highway plan that I am proposing to the legislature. First of all, this will amount to $750 million of state funds going to highways over the next 10 years. And this means that we are putting on the table $2 billion of federal funds over the same 10-year period. This highway plan that I'm proposing includes no new taxes. That means no increase in the gasoline tax, no increase in the diesel tax, no waiver of exemptions. This is no new taxes that are to be considered under this plan. Third, the first year, which I mentioned is $46.1 million, can be funded based upon the current unallocated surplus of $40 million. This would be $20 million that should come from rainy day funds and $20 million that would come from my executive discretionary funds that I would allocate. In my judgment, this leaves sufficient rainy day funds for other emergencies of the state. It doesn't fully deplete those. This is unallocated funds that we can tap to immediately go for one-time funding toward the need before September 1 of this year. Fourth part of the plan is that the revenue from sales tax on new and used cars is phased in over 5 years and capped at $25 million. This has been proposed in the past. It has never been done, but we are tapping that portion of general revenues that really relate to highway user fees and saying we're going to phase that in and apply it to our highways. I'll go over the amounts of that in a few minutes. Fifth, this general revenue transfer that I just indicated by the sales tax of new and used cars going to highways, that new general revenue transfer would be offset by reduction in spending or other budget offsets. Number 6, we would redirect $2.7 million from general revenue for the diesel tax that is currently being collected. This would actually be $4 million total, but with the 70-30 split with counties and cities, that would be $2.7 million that would go toward our state needs. Next, we would redirect $5.4 million from Central Services, the Central Services Fund that funds our constitutional officers and other specific items. We'd redirect $5.4 million from that fund, which represents the amount collected from the half-cent sales tax that was designated for roads. We passed the bond issue. Central Services has been taking a portion of that, but that's the bond issue the people voted on, or the half-cent sales tax for roads. We would redirect that to the purpose intended, which is roads. That would be $5.4 million. And then the next and final part of the equation for the highway plan would be a legislative commitment and directive that I would support that would transfer 25% of unallocated surpluses each year to the Highway Department after our Revenue Stabilization Act or our budget needs have been met. So let me reiterate that. And I want to give credit to Representative Joe Jett. Joe, we're right here, who initially suggested this to me. Talked to him the other day. It makes sense. This is money that is after all of our budget needs are met. That we have an unallocated surplus that has been divvied up historically in terms of GIF funding. We would take 25% of that unallocated surplus and transfer that to the Highway Department on an annual basis. And if you look at the last 10 years, on average, that would be $48 million per year. You can't count on that every year because surpluses go up and down, but on the average during the last 10 years, that has been $48 million per year. And so with that, I want to make a couple of observations with the charts. As you know, this is the first time in history that we have made a meaningful contribution from general revenues to highways. And let's put this in the context of our surrounding states. As you can see, I asked where this 0.01% is, and it's some obscure amount that you don't need to worry about. It's so small. But Oklahoma, 64% of their highway funding is from general revenues. Tennessee, 10% from general revenues. Mississippi, 51% from general revenues. Louisiana, 8% from general revenues. Missouri, 37% from general revenues. Texas has been 0%, but if you read the fine print on the asterisks, they just passed in 2015 the first time funding from general revenues to highways. And so I think this trend, this historic comparison shows that states are having to be more creative, having to look at state responsibility on highway funding, and Arkansas, with the contributions I outlined, probably will not be 1%. But it is a step that is important for us to take. It is a means to accomplish the objective of adequately funding our highways and taking advantage of the federal funds that are available. And this is a more detailed explanation of how this works year by year. So the first one I mentioned is the transfer of funds from the FY15 unobligated surplus. That's $20 million plus the rainy day funds is $20 million. This is the FY17. And then I mentioned that we would take the user tax, the sales tax on new and used vehicles. That would be gradually phased in over 5 years. And this is what I think we should be doing budget-wise, which is $1.5 million in FY17. It gradually increases where it's capped at $25 million. And so that impact is $1.5 million in FY17 on general revenues. And then you take, you eliminate the state central services deduction, which is $5.4 million that we can add in FY17. So in FY17, which is September of this year, we have $46.9 million to meet what was the objective of $46.1 million that we wanted to transfer to the highway department. If you look at future years, you see that you're not going to be having the $40 million of one-time transfer from the surplus and rainy day fund, but you will have that opportunity for 25% of the unallocated surplus that can be transferred. I have $48 million here. It might not be $48 million because, you know, in some years it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and in some years it's lower amounts. In one year it was actually zero. But on the historic average, it is $48 million. Again, that depends upon budget circumstances, but this is after all other revenue needs are met of the state, and then 25% of unallocated revenues would go to the highway department. If you look at 18, so you'll then have $8 million from the sales tax on new and used vehicles. You would have $2.7 million from the diesel tax, and you would have the $5.4 million from the state central services transfer, and so that's $16.1 million plus the unobligated surplus. Is there a guarantee? No, but I think from historic patterns that you'll be able to see us to meet the obligations that we need to have toward the highway department, and then it sequentially goes through each year. And so that's a little bit of the summary of each element of the highway plan broken down by future fiscal years.
So, Governor, overall, how much will we be spending overall?
You mean in terms of the state general revenue budget? It's about $5 billion. So you can see that the general revenue hit that we will take in FY17 is the $1.5 million, and that's it. So it's a very small adjustment to our state revenue budget in FY17. In 18, that's when we pick up, that's $2.7 million, and then you would have the $8 million that would be from the sales and use tax that would increase that too. So a larger hit from general revenues then, and this is where we've got to make up that in terms of efficiencies in state government, which, by the way, those amounts can be made up from the efficiency studies that we have ongoing, some other offsets that we're looking at. I'll work with the legislature to make sure that those offsets are in place. I wanted to mention just a couple other things before I turn it open for questions. First, I want to applaud the highway commissioners and the highway department, Scott and his team, for being responsive to what I've raised with them, and that is that there needs to be a greater level of transparency, considering internal reforms within the Highway Commission and Highway Department. If we are for the first time going to be asking for general revenues to come forward to the Highway Department. And so as part of this, I would expect there to be an increased level of legislative oversight that would be determined consistent with the Mack-Blackwell Amendment that we've lived under in our Constitution and the recognized independence from the executive branch from the operations of the Highway Department. Secondly, I've asked the Highway Commission for internal reforms, and that is greater level of transparency, a greater level of understanding as to how the funds are allocated and how the commissioners are, the responsibility they have in terms of population and where the money flows to cars. And they have indicated in my meetings with Scott a great level of responsiveness and understanding of that. And so I've put that on the table because I know that will be a legislative request as we see these general revenues funds flow in their direction. And then finally, I want to add that this is a much needed highway plan. It is a highway plan that has no new taxes. It is a highway plan that allows us to fund all of the essential services of our state without jeopardizing them. And it's a highway plan that allows us to grow in our revenues to meet the continued needs of highways for the purpose of economic development in this state. This all could be jeopardized if my budget that I will present is not acceptable to the legislature. In other words, I've already mentioned that I might have to have two budgets. This budget, with the surplus funds that are available, that I can allocate $40 million to highway needs in our state, is not workable if we do not have access to the federal funds that are part of the Medicaid expansion. So I just want to put that asterisk in the mix as we make this presentation today. Finally, I want to applaud Speaker Gillum and President Jonathan Dismang. They have really been great partners in this, helped me to formulate this plan. This is not just something that's come from the executive branch. This has really been a joint effort with the Highway Working Group, the legislative body and leaders, and the executive branch. So with that, I'd be happy to turn it over for questions.
So, have we made a decision yet on when you all lawmakers take up your highway plan? Is it going to be combined with the Medicaid expansion proposal?
I'm going to continue to work with the legislative leadership on that. We've had a couple of discussions, and whereas I thought perhaps we should combine the legislative sessions, there might be some wisdom in keeping them separate. So that remains to be determined. I kept that option open. I do expect these issues will need to be resolved, some of them before the fiscal session begins. And so I'll continue to work with the legislative leadership, and again, this will be resolved in a special session. It will need to be this year. As to the timing of it, before or after the fiscal session, stay tuned for that announcement.
So, sort of, that announcement directly, what do you see the impact to prison programs, social services programs? You got a bunch of IRA lobbyists. What do you think the net effect on them is?
Zero negative impact. Absolutely zero.
Is the 25%, is that aimed at getting rid of legislative GIF?
Well, I wouldn't say it's aimed at helping highways and economic development in this state. Now, part of the consequence of it is that it will reduce funds that are available for legislative GIF and perhaps executive GIF. No, no, ma'am.
Taxes will stay the same?
Yes, ma'am. So the taxes, it's a very good point, actually. The tax on new and used cars remains exactly the same, but these are considered user fees because these people that buy cars and used cars are using them on the roads. And so we're transferring a portion of the tax that's in place to general revenues, but the tax will not go up. Thank you.
So do you, on that number one, does that need legislative approval, or is that something you can do on your own?
On the transfer of funds,
Right.
I can do the $20 million of my executive GIF or unobligated surplus, but the rainy day funds needs to have legislative approval.
That you're going to do a special session to pass the transfer?
That's my expectation.
How much will that leave in surplus and rainy day funds?
We have about, and I've got Larry Walther, are you here? And Duncan, where are you? Our budget folks are here. They can give you specific numbers, but in round numbers, this takes less than half. So we've got, in rainy day funds, I think it's about 46 million. And in the unobligated amount, I think we have over 40 million there. So this is taking less than half, again, leaving, there's other obligations I have for some of those discretionary funds, as well as the rainy day funds are there for unseen emergencies.
This is, as you know, sir, this is unprecedented.
Yes.
Does that give you any thought? You're fearful of the precedent?
Well, there's probably a couple different precedences here. First of all, we got a highway plan with no new taxes. That's a precedent. And then secondly, we've got, it might be what you're referring to, which is utilizing general revenues. Is that what you're speaking of?
Yes.
No, I'm not nervous about it. I think it's the right thing to do. But, you know, I have to do it in terms of managing the overall budget, which I think we've done very responsibly. I wanted to, higher ed is here. I see Dr. Robin Bowen, and she's been on our highway task force. She'll be able, she's nervous about it. I talked to her yesterday, and, you know, my commitment is that this is not going to be reducing funding that's available for education, higher ed, and the other services of our state. That's why it's very carefully crafted for unallocated funds, and we are taking some general revenue money there, but I have full confidence that working with the legislature will be offset fully through efficiencies and other offsets that we might look at.
Not concerned that you open the barn door, so to speak.
No, that's what I feel pretty good about, actually. That's a barn door that is not sacrosanct. It is the right thing to do, as illustrated by the needs of other states. I think it gives a reason, actually, for a closer bond or relationship and transparency between the legislature and the Highway Commission, which there's the independence, again, that's there, but at the same time, I think it will build a greater partnership between them.
You mentioned, how crucial it is to obtain that federal match, but such a large portion of this involves the assumption that those GIF funds will continue to, meet this estimate. Is there a plan B for what happens in future fiscal years if it's not approaching that level?
Well, the options at that time would be to come back and look at the other options that haven't been tapped from the Highway Working Group. They put a lot of different recommendations for funding there. And by the way, a number of these are from the Highway Working Group. So I've picked a couple of their options, one that Representative Jett had on there, some of my own ideas in here. And so if somehow our expectations in life and the historical precedences are not fulfilled, then we look at the other options that are there and make judgments at that time. Yes?
Comment that this plan is contingent on federal funds that come through Medicaid. So could that be considered as kind of a shot across the bow at maybe some former private option supporters that have recently expressed some concern with continuing the program?
I really tried to phrase it in a way that it's not perceived in that way. I'm not trying to be threatening. I'm not trying to be alarmist, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't have this news conference talking about the highway plan and utilizing $40 billion of unallocated surplus if I didn't have that asterisk there. So it's really a matter of full disclosure and honesty in my presentation here. So that's a realistic view of it and a realistic presentation.
How much has the general revenue and the surplus been for the past 5 years?
The surplus in the past 5 years, in the last, it's averaged $48 million. I think that might be over the last, I'm sorry, half of it's been over the last, anyway, $48 million each year over the last 5 or 6 years.
You said you work with the legislature to help offset some of the general revenue dollars. Do you have any specific suggestions on how to do that?
I've presented some on the table. As you know, that's a matter of negotiation. And so I've got my ideas on that. And so what I've presented here is not pie in the sky. We're going to come up with efficiency, or we're going to eliminate fraud and abuse in government. That's really important for you to understand. I have a very specific way in which that can be accomplished, in addition to general efficiencies. But this is a matter of negotiation with the legislature as to how to achieve those efficiencies and those savings. So I don't want to lock myself into a non-bargaining position. So I want to let you know I have specifics there. It is doable. I need the cooperation of the legislature. They might come in and say, we don't like your idea, but here's another idea. And if they come up with those savings and it's reasonable, we'll be able to work that out.
So are there going to be any more highways being built here?
I sure hope there's more highways being built here. Scott Bennett, are we going to build some more highways?
Governor, post watching at home saying, how does this impact me? Why is this important to me? What's your answer to that?
Everybody wants new highways. They didn't want to, in this economy, have higher taxes in order to pay for those highways. So what it means to them is we're not going to get our cake and eat it in that sense, but we are going to be able to pull together with a more efficient government, with a conservative approach to this, fund highways and not raise taxes. That's what it means to the average person out there. And so we're going to be able to capture the $200 billion in federal money available every year without raising taxes, and that's what it means to the person filling their tank at the gas pump.
It's going to look like Texas highways, because that's what it looks like.
The central services commission, since that's tied to the half-cent sales tax, what happens after the temporary sales tax expires?
That will go away. That is a correct observation. And so let me just say on the state central services, right now the balance is $53.3 million, and so this transfer and the balance has been going up. So this is a very reasonable transfer, and it has been growing in terms of the balance. This will continue until the tax goes off, which is, at that point, you've got a half-cent sales tax being collected for our bond issue that is still 6-7 years down the road? 7 years down the road. And so, obviously, at that time, you've got a change in circumstances. You're losing a half-cent sales tax. What the voters decide at that point is undetermined. But so we have 7 years, which is about as far as you can plan in state government.
How sustainable a plan is this? We're relying pretty heavily on what's considered one-time funds. With the working group, when they were talking about generating money, they were talking about $110, $160 million a year annually. This is still below that, and it's relying a lot on one-time money. I guess how sustainable is that?
It's sustainable and it's adaptable. And that's the benefit of this plan, that, it is, and let me rephrase that, it is realistic and it is adaptable, and I believe it is sustainable. It's a good plan for as long as we can reasonably forecast. It may have to be adjusted, and that's what governance is about, is making adjustments based upon changing circumstances. So we don't know whether the historical precedents will maintain with the $48 million available. That's really the only fluid part of that. And so, if the revenues don't maintain, it probably means we shouldn't be raising taxes either. But it means that we have to adjust and do other things.
Surpluses are basically economy, so the economy were to take,
You said sales taxes?
the surpluses in the state budget are largely due to the economy doing well, growing, so if the economy were to tank, this would be possible.
Well, when the economy tanked in 2008, the 2009 surplus is zero. So sure, the economy has an impact on it. But the surplus is also impacted by a conservative approach to governing and budgeting. And that's the approach that we've taken. And that's part of the reasons that we've had, other than that 1 year, significant surpluses that covers rainy day, but also covers other obligations of our state. So the growth of the economy is important, absolutely.
So what do you mean? I mean, everybody uses the word transparency, but I'm not sure what you mean by asking the highway commission to be transparent.
Well, they're troubled by that too, because they don't understand what I mean. Because they know full well what they're doing and the reason for it. They're actually transparent within themselves, but I think there's just a lack of understanding on the public's part and even on policymakers' part as to how they function and how the money is distributed. And so I just asked them to internally review that, to be open to suggestions and changes. For example, the legislature believes that there can be more efficiencies in the highway department. This gives them an opportunity to say we're one of the most efficiently operated departments in the United States. But whenever there's general revenues that flow toward the highway department, I think it's a good thing for legislators, the public, to have opportunity to really ask questions about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how they're managing it.
Will the highway department be the one filling in the potholes and taking
I want, not the highway department. They're shaking their head no. All right, is there any other question from the media?
One session or two. So one special session or two.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have one physical session. In terms of special sessions, I would expect two special sessions, just breaking them apart for two different purposes and the different agenda items that will be needed.
What did you think about the Supreme Court saying it would not review the Parking Protection Act?
Well, whenever, I think you go back to the beginning, that on that Heartbeat Protection Act, there were really two parts to it. One was the prohibition, but the other one was greater information required in terms of disclosures. That has been upheld, and so part of the law was upheld originally by the court, part of it struck down, the Supreme Court affirmed that. So I'll let the Attorney General comment beyond that, and I have not had a chance to review it any further. Thank you all very much.